The views and opinions expressed in our program are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. All rights reserved. Are you searching for that voice of reason in these troubled times? Do some things just not make sense? We are determined to help navigate through this unparalleled, extraordinary time in history with everyday people emphasizing open-mindedness, free thinking, and a desire to be empowered at the grassroots level, working with what nature has given us and protecting that from those who are exploiting it. And welcome to our special edition series, SDGs and What You Need to Know. Together, we will be explaining and discussing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Our mission is to educate everyday citizens about SDGs, what they are, what they mean, how the laws and policies that are and have been passed can and will affect us, not only here in Canada, but around the world. Additionally, by learning and understanding these 17 goals, we can all become one step closer in helping to affect change in this world from a grassroots perspective. DA has not reached the targeted level. Private investment flows are not well aligned with sustainable development. There continues to be a significant digital divide, and there are ongoing trade tensions. To be successful, everyone will need to mobilize both existing and additional resources, and developed countries will need to fulfill their official development assistance commitments. All right, Mark, I'll turn the mic over to you to start our discussion.
Yeah, so fascism, the partnership between global governance and multinationals, oligarchs, big tech, monopolies, you name it. Also included in the mix are about 8,000 NGOs around the world. NGOs are non-government organizations that work with government to implement and encourage others to implement the goals of sustainable development. And there may be more than 8,000. This was a couple of years ago. So chances are pretty good there's more than 8,000 NGOs. But this is where we see the corruption. This is where we see governments funding these SGOs or NGOs through the grant process. And all of them are playing along. All of them are contributing whatever it is they can contribute to achieving the goals of sustainable development. Again, through the grant process, through different funding mechanisms, SNC Lavalin, We Charity, all are examples of said NGOs or multinationals. So this is it. This is this is the coming together. And I want people to understand again. I just want to refresh their memory, because when we talk about all of this is the convergence of two ideologies, communism and fascism, who are both responsible for the deaths of hundreds of millions of people in the 20th century. And they'll be responsible for many, 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 many more deaths. We're talking billions, if they're allowed to continue forward with this agenda. And those two ideologies, the UN being the socialist communist side of things, where most of the people that run the committees at the UN come out of Socialist International. And then you have the World Economic Forum, which is the fascist side of things, run by Klaus Schwab, who has a heritage. His father was a Nazi, corporate ownership, worked with the Nazis to help the Nazis achieve the goals they wanted to achieve. And so you have that convergence of these two, and those are the two entities that basically push this thing. And of course, the people that created this agenda, the Club of Rome, Dennis Meadows, with his book Limits to Growth, is a foundational piece to this agenda. And then you have the same people creating the World Economic Forum in 1971, tapping Klaus Schwab to run that organization. in partnership, and we saw them. They've been partnered, and let's not kid ourselves. They've been partnered unofficially since 68, 71, the creation of the World Economic Forum. But in June of 2019, they formally came together, officially, quote unquote, and partnered, the UN and World Economic Forum, in June of 2019, 6 months before COVID. So that's an important date, an important partnership that we have to recognize. But all of these organizations, all of these NGOs, all of these multinationals, big tech, the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the big banks, they're all on board because they all see a benefit to authoritarian, totalitarian global governance. And that's exactly what all of this does. It hoards the world's resources under one umbrella. It hoards the world's governance and control of the people under one umbrella. And all of these NGOs have been promised the world, and they'll get it through, corruption, through different funding mechanisms. And that's how this all comes together, and that's how they all work together, and they are all in it together, to achieve the ultimate goal. And some of that ultimate goal is also depopulation and population reduction, and total control, and, like, as I said, totalitarianism, authoritarianism. That's what it is, and that's where we're headed.
Well, that's where they'd like us to be headed. But I think Canada and Canadians are going to start seeing things a little differently. Because as they point out in Target 17.1 is to improve domestic capacity for tax and other revenue collection. And you alluded to fascism, communism, and that's what they've always been about, is collecting taxes on everything. And this is why digitizing everything and going with carbon credits is such a big deal, because every transaction is going to be taxed. Doesn't matter if you're selling a used bike online, if that thing still exists in the future, or selling it to your neighbor, where things have goods and services change hands, the government wants their slice of the pie. And digital currency is what's going to do that for them, because right now in a cash currency, I can go and buy a bicycle on the local website, pay the person 20, whatever they're asking for it, give them a bill, our transaction is complete, we're both happy, and we go on our merry way. The government has already got their taxes when that bike was sold new at the retailer. They would have collected GST. But here now, it runs the gauntlet of what kind of tax are you going to be paying on used goods? It just, again, they're lining it out for you, but at the same time, there's so much lateral movement that they can change it on a whim and put in whatever number they want, because they talk about the 0.7%. Well, 0.7% doesn't sound a whole lot to somebody who lives in North America. But if your wages are suddenly decreased and you're living on UBI, 0.7% now cut into your fund money, or any money that you may have for extracurricular activities for your children, or be able to afford that, AAA Angus beef steak or hamburger or whatever it happens to be. They are tapping into a lot of discretionary income and wealth redistribution. I see this as where we're going to be lifting up the rest of these countries. And you outlined them in one of our other series. How many? 130 was it? 135?
135, yeah.
They are coming on board on the backs of our hardworking Canadians. And I'm all about helping people, but I want to be the judge of who I'm helping, when I'm helping it, and is it going to be effective?
Right. And are those people actually seeing any improvement to their lives? And the answer in the most cases is no.
It all gets through corruption.
Yes, siphoned. It's all siphoned by the time it gets to the people. There's nothing left.
This should cause many alarm bells to go ringing off.
Yeah, I just see this SDG as basically just summing up they're public and private partnerships, which is basically corporations that are going to carry out through the partnerships of the totalitarian governments of that are withholding to United Nations once again. It's all partnerships to be against us people and control the people.
Well, and we saw that through COVID. All of these, you know, big box stores, multinationals, they all played along, right? Like you couldn't walk through Costco without wearing a mask, or the mask Nazis would come and kick you out, you know, and you'd have to stay 6 feet apart, and you have to follow the lines. If you don't follow the lines, there's going to be somebody coming after you to make sure you're following the arrows that are marked clearly on the floor for you to follow. So they all played ball. They all played along, right? It was the mom and pop stores that, you know, some of them rebelled somewhat to some degree. Some restaurants, some shops rebelled, and that's what they need to quell. That's what they need to shut out. And so all of these partnerships, we saw it in real time, and they have their partnerships to impose all of their um, you know, upcoming restrictions, upcoming mandates because of the climate crisis, because of the climate emergency, and everything that's going to flow from that, and other things. There's probably going to be another pandemic.
Yeah, well, they forecasted it. Future vaccine pandemics, future outbreaks, future viruses. I just want to allude to a little bit about what you were talking about, the small businesses that some did stand out. We had a burger joint here in Winnipeg,
Monstrosity Burger.
Monstrosity Burger. Yep. And so they made some headlines and racked up a lot of fines, but the machine crushed them. They're out of business, doors closed, shuttered, done. So the machine ultimately won. And, and when we look at the fines, this is something that the pandemic made blatantly obvious to me. When you can receive a $5,000 fine as a first offense for what I would call a minor infraction, and if you even want to get there, like we could have that discussion, but not at this time. But it's just like, and you look at some of the churches and stuff like that, they were fined $20, $30, $50, $100,000. And so if they were to pay this, the government gets a huge payday for imposing these things. And by virtue, they will actually be going bankrupt or stifling their congregation or the restaurant, the patrons who are coming there. Or you shut them down and you achieve their game. So it's very difficult for people to navigate these waters because they've covered an awful lot of ground and they've made it very, very difficult for you to fight back. They aren't playing fair. I guess that's kind of how I'd want to round it up here.
Another small business out of Calgary, Without Papers Pizza. You heard of him? He lost his business because he fed an unvaccinated child a pizza. A 13-year-old who didn't get jabbed sat down and ate pizza in his restaurant. That was against the law, apparently. And I just wanted to go back to talking about small business because this is really important. I myself am a small business owner. This man had a restaurant for 20 years. He hired over 500 people. He was a good boss. His employees liked him. He paid out $10 million in wages. He put $10 million into the local economy. He collected $1.5 million in GST, paid $2.5 million in rent. And the government shut him down because he fed a 13-year-old a pizza.
And this is the message they're sending.
Because ultimately, what small business represents is everything they don't want. And small business represents freedom. And small business represents this liberty that
support local is a bad word for them. They don't want to hear support local.
Yes, absolutely, 100%. That goes against everything that they want to achieve through all of this, and it pisses off their partners, their multinationals. But it really is the foundation of if we're going to create any sort of opposition, it has to be through small business and medium-sized business, and businesses have to come together. They have to unite, and they have to be on the same page, so we can all make the same decisions when they're coming after us, and we can put up a strong front and say, yeah, no, sorry, this goes against every free market value that we should all have as small business owners.
And it goes to like their target 17.6, a global technology facilitation mechanism, and that fixed internet broadband subscriptions by speed, which is interesting because if you have been on certain carriers, they will throttle your speed depending how much data you're using. And I experienced that with my cell phone. I get the first so and so many gigs for free at this price, but I have unlimited when it's throttled back. There again, this mechanism where we talk about global technology, that means everything that's being done here, let's say in Winnipeg or Saskatoon or wherever you folks are at, is going to hit the World Wide Web, and it's going to be on a server potentially halfway around the world or all the way around the world. And everything is going to be tracked. You are not going to be able to switch this device off and go camping or fishing. It's like you will carry this device with you because internet service is there. It's everywhere. And if it by chance happens to not be there, I don't think you'll be going there. That'll be a no-go zone, and that will be deemed crown property, and you cannot go trespassing on there whatsoever. And this will be where they're going to keep you in cities. And to a sense, I feel this in Winnipeg already. So 5G has been rolled out here now for 6-8 months or so. The speed I get on my cell phone is fairly consistent, it's very reliable, and it's fairly quick. But as soon as I hit 20 kilometers out of Winnipeg, I'm doing stuff at the research farm, or I'm going on a journey, I'm going to see my mom, those kinds of things, I notice an immediate change. What I used to have like 4G or LTE service, I was more than happy with. Everything worked. The cellular service is not working in rural areas as it was before.
They don't want it to.
Oh, well, I spoke with a first responder, and so his cell phone is on a priority list on the cell tower. So if that cell tower is maxed out and his phone rings or whatever he needs to call out, he gets priority. He says it feels like I no longer have any priority. He says everything has been downgraded and has been shifted. And this again speaks to this. They want to get you into the cities, because if you experience fast internet service, fast self-service, and so on and so forth in the city, but you get absolutely zero out of the city. And I look at our First Nations up in northern Manitoba that don't even have internet right now. The push is to get them into the city. They don't want them scattered across the province and out in the free land. They want control on them. They want them in the city, them where they can track them.
Well, everything electricity based, right down to cars, can be turned off just like a light switch. And it really depends who controls the switch. Your gas powered car, I guess they can only control you as far as a tank of gas will go. That's why they don't really like the petroleum. It's uncontrollable.
Well, and we could go back to the days of a carburetor and making some homemade kerosene with a still or even alcohol. Cars will run on that. Fuel injection probably a little less so, but the mechanisms that our grandfathers lived through in the 30s and 40s to get by, to make it through a rough season, they improvised and they banded together and got through that. This next cycle, I see the same thing again, where we will have to band together with like-minded individuals, organize and push back against this machine, and ultimately kick it down the curb, because it's just.
There's going to be a segment of the population that will be the wildlings. If you remember Game of Thrones, they were the ones on the other side of the wall, and they're the wildlings. They lived in the wild, and that's how we'll be perceived. This alternative society that people want to build, parallel. to what's happening. I guess my dog says that's enough, Dad.
That's a wrap, folks. We would like to thank you so much for joining us in this journey. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with others on your social media platforms. Thanks again for listening.